Thank you.
There are different views on the issue. What happened yesterday? Was it a military coup? What do you think?
I think obviously there are two views of that, and I think the difference between them is rather semantic. It depends what you put the focus on. If you put the focus on the legal procedure, then obviously it is not okay for an army to intervene and depose a president who is legitimate constitutionally. There is no question about that. But this is also what happened with Mubarak, and this is also what happened in Tunisia with Ben Ali. So the other side is, if you focus on the legitimacy upon which the constitutional and legal order rests, and then you see that this legitimacy has eroded sufficiently because you have a revolt, because you have millions of people in the street, and so on, then the issue of procedure becomes less important. It depends, one, on which aspect is more important to you, and two, on where do you want to take the situation. For me, as a citizen, I'm more interested in the legitimacy upon which the order rests. We went to the streets 2 years ago because we wanted a democratic order. The transition to democracy was derailed, and we ended up with a new authoritarian regime. So we went, and the system was closed so that we had no option but to go back to the street. We went to the streets, we were few, and then thanks to the Muslim Brothers governance style, they added people to the street on our side until the majority of Egyptians became in the street and the minority became in the political and legal system.
But do you know that what we see in the streets now are the majority?
Well, I think it's obvious if you look at the aerial footage of the demonstrations on the 30th of June, the numbers were estimated with Google Maps and estimates and so on by 17 million people. That is more than, the electoral body in Egypt is 25 million people, the 100% of the electoral body. But also, as a citizen and someone who lived, you can see, you look at the number of people cheering. The people are smiling again on the streets and so on. So, of course, Egypt is divided. Of course, there is a part in the population who feels betrayed and this is not okay. But in fact, this is not the ideal way of handling political problems in a country. The ideal way was to build a framework that is sufficient for all political forces to operate inside, as you have said, is to have the opposition in the parliament, not in the square. But because the Muslim Brothers refused to build this consensus, and in fact took the election, the majority vote they got for the president, which, by the way, the president wouldn't have been elected without voters from outside his own camp. But anyway, they took his 51% as a license to basically reformat the system. And I don't think this is part of democracy. I think when you're elected, according to rules, you have to continue to play by the rules. If you're elected, you cannot, after the election, assume new powers, as President Morsi did in November when he came up with this constitutional amendment, according to which he managed to exclusively draft a constitution, rush it to a referendum while excluding the others and so on. So what we see, again, is probably a bad option, but it's the least bad among the other bad options we have.
But Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood, they are really angry now, and they say they don't want to cooperate, they don't want to join anything. How could you come to a solution without the support or without the Muslim Brothers?
Look, we have the others, whether you call them the civic movement, the democratic movement, or whatever name we get, which is not really one movement, but it's a kind of a broad and loose, very disorganized coalition of people who want democracy. Since January 2011, we've been trying to first establish rules that guarantee independence of the judiciary, freedom of the media, basic individual and minority rights, the things that you need for a democracy to thrive. And then go to elections, so that when you win a majority, the majority has boundaries in the exercise of power, as in democracies. We were prevented from achieving this in the last 2 years before the elections by the Muslim Brothers, who used their superior organizational power and mobilization power to kind of push the military in the first transition into this flowed process. The end is what we have seen. Throughout the process, we've been pushing, pleading with them to reach a national pact on transition. They have refused. So now I think it is incumbent on all of us, especially the military, is to get this national pact. I don't think Egypt will move towards a proper democracy, even a young one, even an imperfect one. I don't think we will have stability in Egypt if we do not build rules that allow all political forces, including the Islamists, to operate freely without transgressing those boundaries, if you want. And I think this is the test. But I have to say, and that's my my only assessment, my personal assessment. So you don't have, viewers don't have to believe it. But I think the Muslim Brothers have managed throughout the last year to lose a tremendous amount of public support, especially among the poor, the poor and rural areas who were their base of support. They saw that they're focused on power and dominating state institutions more than they are focused on providing services and facing governance issues. So my assessment is the Muslim Brothers as a political movement is probably going to take a long time before it recovers. However, there are other Islamists and those who believe that Islam is also political and has a social and economic project for the society are still there. And it's probably more likely that you will see other organizations and other political parties picking up this part of support in the society than the Muslim Brothers. But the bottom line is we have to have an inclusive process with the military, with the backing of the military and all the other forces that are there. And this process has to reassure everyone that we are moving towards a democratic model, not a new form of authoritarianism. And at least this is what if you can call us the younger generation or those who kind of fight for democracy, this is what we want. And if the military do not follow this line, we will push them.
Then we will go back to the streets.
We will go back to the streets.
And you seem like an optimist. You believe that there will be democracy in Egypt eventually?
Look, I believe that Egypt has changed profoundly. And without this change, January 2011 would not have happened. I believe there is a new majority in Egypt below what you see on the surface. That is the 75% of those who are under 50 in Egypt and who want a modern democracy, who want to be part of the world. And they are not only in the liberal camp, they are in all camps. And I believe that ultimately we shall prevail. But it will take time and the road will be bumpy. And as you can see, it works in waves. We go in one side and then, we were partners with the Muslim Brothers against the old regime. Muslim Brothers, in our view, betrayed us and hijacked the transition. We turned. Now we have, ironically, the military and some of the old regime on our side. They claim that they have understood that what is needed is democracy. We will examine that. But ultimately, we are prepared to push again and continuously until we get it right on the road to democracy, and we will get it right.